history. Can I sit?
Can I adjust your mic?
Okay, thank you.
And will you say your name when you start?
No.
Okay.
Okay, are we good? I like to sit because you're sitting, unless everybody wants to stand. Okay, so I'm Harvey Sluggo Wasserman. I was known as Sluggo for many years, and many people who've known me forever don't know my name is Harvey Wasserman. But I rebirthed Sluggo with the Harvey Weinstein case because I was introducing myself in LA and people were slugging me, so you can call me Sluggo. Not only did I used to play baseball, but I find that the older I get, the better I was. So, let that sink in a little bit. Okay, so here's what happened to me, and here's why I am on this case, and I'm very grateful for Jim to talk about California. I now vote in Los Angeles, and this is my ballot. So if anybody wants to see this came in the mail. This is and with my mail. It's an actual ballot, but I am not going to mail this in, and I am not going to give it to even Bernie Sanders people, and I'm not going to take it in Dropbox. On election day, I am going to go in and turn in this ballot. And the one thing you do not want to get when you go in to vote, the one thing you do not want to get is something called a provisional ballot, otherwise known as a placebo ballot, because they are not counted. Technically, they're counted later, but they really don't count. So, the critical election in presidential in California is, of course, the primary. And we saw that in 2016. I am a conspiracy theorist because, as a historian, and in the back of that book that is being passed around, there is a section called Conspiracy Theories and Actual Conspiracies. And I will tell you that the Spanish-American War, World War I, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, and a whole lot else were started based on conspiracies, which were lies, and they actually were conspiracies. And so, if you can tell me who killed John Kennedy, I can. There are plenty of conspiracies in theories in history that have proven to be true. So, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. So, just because you're a conspiracy theorist doesn't mean there aren't conspiracies. And I think that the California vote in 2016, along with the vote in New York, in the primaries, was stolen by the Clinton people to prevent Bernie from getting the nomination. And I think that they're dead set on doing that again this year. And I think that what happened in Iowa was so implausible. I mean, how do you make that up? And I know you're in the business and you know plenty of people in the computer business who are just plain fuck-ups. But, this is a little much for me. I still believe pretty firmly that Bernie was the rightful nominee in 2016. And, all those people that say he couldn't win, here we wound up with Hillary winning and not taking office. So I got into this in 2004. I am a historian. This is about my 20th book, and this history of the United States is the first history of the United States that really starts with the Indians and many indigenous. And any democracy that exists in the United States exists because of the indigenous, especially the Iroquois. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy was the most advanced democracy in the history of the world at that time. It really hasn't been surpassed, and the key to it, of course, is that it was a matriarchy, and still is a matriarchy, but that's a whole other line of discussion. So I was living in Ohio, teaching history at two colleges, and my buddy, my co-conspirator, Bob Fitrakis, who's a political scientist, was calling me and telling me all the stuff that was going on, that they were stealing the election in 2004. And in 2004 in Ohio, the Secretary of State of Ohio, who was running the election, was a guy named J. Kenneth Blackwell. He was actually the first African-American elected to statewide office in Ohio, but he was a Republican, and he was running, you got to credit them with a sense of humor. J. Kenneth Blackwell was running the presidential election as Secretary of State, and he was also co-chair of the committee to re-elect Bush Cheney. So there was no conflict of interest seen in this. This also happened in Florida 2000, where Katherine Harris, the Secretary of State, was the co-chair of the elect Bush Cheney campaign. And of course, the brother of the presidential candidate was the governor of Florida. So I'm going to jump back and start there, because this is where the history of modern election theft really starts, and where we have to understand how deep it goes. The first major use of electronic machines in elections in the United States that I know of was actually in New Hampshire in 1988 in the primaries between George H.W. Bush the first, and Bob Dole. And the polls on election day showed Bush losing by 9 points, and he won by 8 points, which is a 17-point shift, which statisticians refer to as a virtual statistical impossibility. And these are machines that were perfected by the CIA. The CIA has been in the business of stealing and flipping elections for a very long time, all over the world. And this is way beyond conspiracy theory. I mean, we know this stuff. And one of the things I have in my book, and I actually have a poster, is a map of U.S. invasions and election thefts that goes all over the world and dates back to Tripoli on the north coast of North Africa in 1803 with Thomas Jefferson, which is really where our overseas empire began. So in 2000, as I'm sure many of you know, Democrats are still yelling and screaming at Ralph Nader for daring to run for president, and he got about 90,000 votes. And what they don't tell you, and the Democrats always scream at the left. This is a genetic reality of the Democratic Party. They never scream at the Republicans. I love how Joe Biden talks about bipartisan working with the Republicans, but they never talk about working with the left. And they always scream at the left for daring to run for office. So in 2000, Ralph Nader ran for President of the United States. Ron's a very good friend of mine, and got about 90,000 votes. And George W. Bush was the second, was the lesser, or George the idiot, however you want to. Well, that's what Green Day called him, so I can get away with it. Won technically, officially by 537 votes. And, but we know that Jeb, his brother, did the CIA thing and eliminated more than 90,000 voters in Florida. And again, you have to credit them with a sense of humor. The laws were on the books from the Confederacy. After the Civil War, and I'll go back and talk about some of this history, but after the Civil War, the 11 states of the Confederacy passed laws saying that if you have been convicted of a felony, you can never vote again. And then they proceeded to convict pretty much every black man in the South of a felony and put them into these prison camps, which were the rebirth of slavery in the South. If you've seen the movie 13 or read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, you know that this is where it kind of came from. And so Jeb, in 2000, used the program, and he said, if your name is Lamar Alexander, and Lamar Alexander in Tennessee is convicted of a felony, we assume that's you, and you're going to be thrown off the voter rolls, even though he's Lamar A. Alexander, and you're Lamar Z. Alexander. I mean, it's preposterous what they did. And the primary investigation was done by Greg Palast, who's still doing, actually they're speaking right today as we speak in LA at a KPFK event. And then in the middle of the election night, there were about 20,000 votes were bouncing around on the election, the electronic machines, especially in Volusia County. Literally, the 20,000 votes were just flipping back and forth like a pinball. And it gave Fox the opportunity to say, well, Bush could win, because it was very clear at that time that Gore was going to win the presidency. And they delayed everything, and they set it all up, and they had these hanging chads, and they had a mishmash in South Florida, and they had a literal fascist mob, which we've seen now again in Ohio, intimidate and stop the recount. And part of that was Brett Kavanaugh. Brett Kavanaugh was the attorney for the Brooks Brothers mob that went in and stopped the recount. So, and then they finally did it, and Gore, of course, screwed it up, and screwed up the legal case, and then the Supreme Court certified Bush to be president by a vote of 5-4. And then a real recount happened, and it showed that Gore actually did win Florida in a fair vote count, but it was too late, and Bush had become president. That's how we got into Iraq and everything else that happened. It's not that Gore wouldn't have gotten into Iraq, but I actually don't think Gore would have gotten into Iraq. So, you know, the modern 21st century catastrophe started in Florida with a stolen election. There's absolutely no doubt about it. It is a conspiracy theory, but it's also an actual conspiracy, yes.
I have a point on just what you said, because the fifth vote was Sandra Day O'Connor. She retired and goes around the country talking to school children about their civic responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's sick. So, and then it happened again in 2004, and of course Al Gore, and I got to tell you this, this is the worst thing that a vice president of the United States has ever done. You know, we can talk about what the presidents have done. So, after 2000, the Black Caucus in Congress was outraged by what had happened. And they went in, when the Electoral College convened in January of 2001, the Black Caucus presented a protest, which you can do under the Constitution. There's a provision in the Constitution that if you want to challenge an Electoral College delegation, you need one senator and one congressperson. And they had the whole Black Caucus, but Al Gore, who was the lame duck vice president, who was presiding over the joint session of Congress when the Electoral College showed up, prevented the Senate from joining in. I don't know how he did it. I don't know how he twisted Paul Wellstone's arm or the rest of the senators, but he prevented any senator from challenging. And then what would have happened was, with one senator and with the Black Caucus, there would have been a 2-hour session, and they would have evaluated the Electoral College delegation for Florida. And Al Gore prevented that from happening. You have to ask the psychiatrist. I mean, I have absolutely no idea why Al Gore would have prevented that from happening.
He didn't want to win.
I guess not.
He said I didn't have a senator. 9/11 was coming. Lieberman was hiding under the podium when he said I didn't have a senator.
Yeah, oh, great. Yes, well, whatever happened. So, and then in 2004, and Al Gore, what has Al Gore said since about protecting elections? Zero. He's never said anything about the Electoral College, and he won the popular vote in 2000. He has never said anything about stripping of the vote. Never said a word about Jeb Bush stripping the 90,000 voters from the voter rolls. Never said a word about the flipped electronic machines. I mean, he went on and did this whole thing on global warming, and mazel tov for that, but you know, how can the guy who was vice president of the United States, and actually I was outraged, I went to see Inconvenient Truth, and the first thing he says in Inconvenient Truth is, well, I was once the next president of the United States, as if it was a joke. And sometimes I almost get thrown out of theaters. I almost get thrown out of Avatar because I started cheering when the bad guy got the spears in his chest. So in this movie, I just started yelling because you were the next president of the United States. You weren't almost the next president. You were, and you didn't say, God, anything. And then here we go sit through this whole movie about how global warming, and he gets the Nobel Prize, and he's still yet to say a word about the theft of the 2000 election.
What about the connection of that to the problem global warming we're having today?
Yeah, I mean, it's outrageous. And then 2004 comes, and I'm in Columbus there, and we watched, and I did a digest of 100 different ways they stole the election. It's outrageous what they did. For example, on election day, you went in Youngstown and you pushed on the electronic machine. You call it push and pray, and you push carry, and Bush lit up. Kept putting, and they call over an election guy. He says, "Oh yeah, it's been happening all day. Keep pushing carry, and Bush eventually. keep pushing carry, and it'll eventually be carried." Or people would push carry, and it would light up, and then they'd go down and they'd finish the ballot, and by the time they got finished, it was Bush again.
Take these in when you go in to vote and film it.
Right. So, you know, and then they did stuff like in some places where you had Scantron ballots, they gave people pencils that couldn't be read by the Scantron reader. So you filled out a whole ballot, and they put it through the Scantron, and you couldn't read it well. Or they took the Scantron ballots where they were programmed to be read by the machines at one precinct, and then they took the ballots to a different precinct where they'd be read differently. So if you marked Kerry, and they would read Kerry at your precinct, they would take those ballots to a different precinct where you marked was a vote for Bush. I mean, they sent out absentee ballots. Check your absentee ballot. They sent out absentee ballots that didn't have Kerry's name on it. You got an absentee ballot in Ohio 2004, there's no place to vote for Kerry. I mean, you know, it's like they just did this in a very large southwestern county. The election was decided in Ohio in 3 counties in southwestern Ohio, and in one of them, the biggest one, Claremont, they declared a Homeland Security alert and confiscated all the ballots. But the federal Homeland Security Agency never heard about it. There was no federal Homeland Security alert. The guys at the local county says, we're calling it a Homeland Security alert, we're taking all the ballots. And they put them in a warehouse. In Greene County, which is Dayton, one of our people went down there to inspect what was going on. She walked into the precinct, one of the big precincts in Dayton, and all the ballots were sitting on the table. And there was nobody there. He just walked in, and there were the ballots, and, you know, have a campfire or whatever, you know. They just did, you know, and it was done. And here's how the election of 2004 was decided. This was the decisive moment. At 12:20 at night, thankfully somebody took a screenshot. CNN had the screen, and it showed Kerry winning Ohio, and it had the whole country. Actually what it had was the 11 swing states. There are 11 swing states in Ohio. And in all of them, there was a red shift. In every swing state, except Wisconsin, which had a Democratic Secretary of State. In every swing state, there was a shift from blue to red. And where Bush wound up with more votes than were shown at 12:20 at night. And in 4 of the 11 swing states, the actual decisive tally switched from Kerry to Bush. 4 states, Ohio, Iowa, New Mexico, and Nevada, switched from Kerry at 12:20 at night to Bush at 2 in the morning. All 4 out of 11. All of them switched except Wisconsin. Some votes from Kerry to Bush, none from Bush to Kerry. There was one state in the whole country where there was a slight blue shift, but it was not a decisive state. And this is how George W. Bush got a second term. And in Ohio, at 12:29, John Kerry was winning by 4.2%, or more than 200,000 votes. There's 5.4 million voted that year in Ohio. And he was up by more than 200,000, 4.2%, and he at 12:20 at night, and at 2 o'clock in the morning, he lost by 2.5%. It was a shift of more than 300,000 votes. Another virtual statistical impossibility. And similar things happened in New Mexico, which also shifted, on the Indian reservations. The people showed up to vote, and they voted. And their votes, when they went to count their votes, none of them had voted for president. They voted for senator and congressman and all that stuff, but these were beheaded ballots. And thousands of votes on indigenous reservations turned up without a preference. So the presumption was that these people showed up, drove 50, 75 miles, whatever, showed up at the polls, waited the obligatory 10 hours that people of color are required to wait to vote in this country, and then filled out their ballots but had neglected to vote for president. I mean, and it changed the state of New Mexico. So this has been going on. Now, another thing that happened, this was in 2004. It was done in 2008 also, but not enough because Obama got a big enough, vote. We had We had a white frat boy in the White House, and then, of course, we appointed a black person to clean up the mess. That was Obama, and that was his 8 years. But plenty of votes were stolen in 2008 as well. We raised the issue in 2012, the voting machines in Cincinnati, which was expected to be decisive, were owned partly by a company that was partly owned by the Romney family, Hart InterCivic. We raised this issue in other places, and people said, it's not significant, it doesn't really matter that he owns part of the voting machine company, that's a big deal. But what really happened in this country, and you have to understand, in 2010, when the censuses are done, the apportionments are done every 10 years. And in 2010, the Koch brothers figured out that they could spend a minuscule amount of their fortune and flip the districts in all the key states in the 2010 off-year elections and take over the reapportionment process. They basically gerrymandered the country in 2010. And they took control of the Congress. And I'll never forget Obama got up and he said that he had taken a shellacking. But they knew what the Koch brothers had done. They didn't say a word about it. The Democratic Party did not say that the entire country had just been gerrymandered. And they wound up losing 1,000 seats. The Democrats have lost 1,000 elected positions since 2010. And 2010 is what we call the red map shift. It's in my history book, and only in my history book. You will not read another history of the United States that talks about this. But the whole electoral map was changed in 2010. There's a book that's been written about it. Anyone want to say what the title was? Rat Front. I don't know how the guy got away with it. But, because you got to... yeah, right.
Legal term.
Well, it was used by the Nixon's dirty tricksters. Rat fucking was what they would go out and play games on people, like making Ed Muskie cry and stuff like that. So the whole electoral vote was map was rat fucked in 2010, and completely changed. And that's why we have, we've had such a terrible Congresses, because they completely reapportioned the congressional representation throughout the United States, which was only overcome in 2016. So in 2016, they do the same stuff. And Hillary Clinton, attacks. In 2000, Al Gore refused to meet with Ralph Nader. I mean, name me a person who's made more change in this country in the last 40 years than Ralph Nader. But Gore couldn't find time, couldn't lower himself to meet with Nader. And then, of course, Hillary Clinton campaigns like Marie Antoinette, basically, and won't deal with Bernie. Bernie Sanders campaigned harder for Hillary Clinton in 2016 than Hillary Clinton did. And she actually went to places that she wouldn't go, like Wisconsin. And so what happens after the 2016 election, which she wins by almost 3 million votes, is she allegedly loses Michigan by 10,000 votes. But guess what? 70,000 of the votes that came in Michigan were beheaded ballots, the same as those Indian reservations in New Mexico. In Flint and in Michigan and in Detroit, 70,000 ballots came in without a preference for president, in a state that she allegedly lost by 10,000. And what did she do about it? Well, let me tell you who did do something about it, Jill Stein. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate in 2016, a good friend of mine, Boston doctor, raised $7 million online to look at the shenanigans in the 2016 election. And my buddy Bob Fitrakis is their lawyer, and they went into Michigan, and they found 70,000 beheaded ballots. And they went into court, and they got a decision from a judge in a court in Michigan that said, I think there's enough weird shit going, it's not the phrase he used, but it's the weird shit doctrine. I got enough weird shit here that I think that there should be a recount in Michigan. But, and this is in a courtroom, and where Hillary's lawyers are in the back of the room. And he turns to Jill Stein and says, but you, the law says that you have to have a mathematical chance of winning. Right. And you don't have a mathematical chance of winning. So I will order a recount in Michigan where Donald Trump allegedly won by 10,000 votes, but there are 70,000 beheaded ballots. So I will order a recount in Michigan if a candidate who has a mathematical chance of winning, i.e. Hillary Clinton, will ask for the recount. And you know, the lawyers said, well, we're just here to observe and we're not going to ask for a recount. Can you fucking believe that? I mean, really. There was no recount in Michigan because after a court approved one, because Hillary Clinton couldn't be bothered to do a recount. And I have not made many sacrifices for the movement. I once missed one of the Golden State Cavaliers playoff games because I had to do something, and a few other things I've done. One of the greatest sacrifices that I have made for this movement is that I read Hillary Clinton's book, cover to cover. I mean, it was painful. It was like many root canals, all of which I've had pulled out. And that book, she attacks Jill Stein. And she says, if everybody who voted green had voted for me, I would have won. Well, maybe she shouldn't have called us deplorables. But, you know, I want to get a big t-shirt that says deplorable. But she had the opportunity, thanks to Jill Stein, in Michigan, to do a recount, and she wouldn't do it. Now, can you imagine the impact it would have had on this, even if she wound up not becoming president? If she had gone into Michigan, at the behest of the Green Party, and done the recount, and found to have won Michigan. And they had flipped Michigan back to the rightful winners, which were the Democrats. The same thing in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, they used computer code that was not approved. It was illegal. The voter code, the machine code that they used in Michigan. in Wisconsin. And my buddy Fitrakis found out, and they went to court, and again, couldn't get anywhere. So the Democrats refused to support that. And then in Pennsylvania, for Christ's sake, they had a Democratic governor. And there was all sorts of shit that went on. Do you mind if I say that? No. Any objections to my foul language? Okay, so, but what do you call it? I mean, there's all sorts of shit in Pennsylvania that just did not pass muster at all. And they had a Democratic governor, for Christ's sake. But they imposed, Jill Stein had $7 million, she did not have enough money to do what needed to be done in Pennsylvania. And these are the three states that put Donald Trump in the White House. Wisconsin, there are two others that we are reasonably sure we're fucked with, which is North Carolina and Florida. The usual, the big five. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida. All extremely dubious. Any committed candidate for President of the United States who, in Hillary Clinton's position, would have challenged those five states and would have won at least three of them. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And she did nothing and attacked the people who were doing the work. And this is a pattern that we will see again, certainly in the primaries. I mean, I don't think, okay, we have people who, screw up computers and completely untested. Why did they go into Iowa with an untested system in the first place? If they didn't mean to steal the goddamn thing. But they really, we won't ascribe motivation here, but these guys really did not want Bernie Sanders to walk out of Iowa with a big, and all these, with a big margin, and all these talking heads are saying, well, I didn't see any big bounce for Bernie. There was a big bounce. 50,000 more people voted in Iowa than in 2016 this time. It was a big jump. And there will be in Nevada and everywhere else because people want him. And I got to tell you now, I think it's